So it's very clear that disciple making is your passion, even as you said. What does it mean to you? I mean, that's a term that a lot of people use. And so what does disciple making mean to Edmund Chan?
When we think about disciple making, we speak about the principles of disciple making, the definition. I want to go beyond that because there are two more things that are very crucial. What it means to me is a pilgrimage and a passion. I'll share with you the passion first. It's easier to grasp. In the passion, it is there are two twin passions I have in ministry: expository preaching and mentoring. If one day the Lord said to me, Edmund, you can only choose one: to preach for the rest of your life or to mentor for the rest of your life. In an instant, at the drop of a hat, I know exactly what I'll choose. I'll choose mentoring. I love to preach. I'm grateful for the ministry the Lord has entrusted to me in preaching. But I see the value in investing in it. So it has become a passion. I've given up speaking in conferences when it clashes with mentoring priorities. Because I feel we can minister to the multitudes, but to invest in the few is the strategy of Jesus. So that's the passion. In terms of the pilgrimage, I'm blessed to be mentored by the Navigators. So I'm here to pay a debt of love to the Navigators. Because the Navigators have invested in my life through Jim Chu and Doug Sparks in particular, and have given me this passion for discipling. And I remember my wife and I were trained in the early days in our discipling, today Dawson, the 2-7 series, and everything else that have became foundational for our lives. So that's what discipling means to me. It means a passion and a pilgrimage of building a church to be strong in its disciple-making roots. And the more I found that the church is strong, the freer I become. I cannot do what I'm doing today if the church has not been discipled. It is very hard. When I go on sabbatical, I don't have to phone up the church to find out what's happening because it's in critical hands. Because I know these guys have been mentored. There's been a discipling journey. That's the pilgrimage. In terms of principle, I think disciple making is the core mission of the church. I'm convinced that it's the strategy of Jesus, and therefore it is important.
But specifically, if you had to say, okay, this person's a disciple, what would describe that? What are the characteristics of that person?
Yes.
How do we know we got there?
In 1979, 78, 79, early 79, I was preaching in Taiwan. I was still in the Navy. The Navy sent me to Taiwan, so I went to the church to preach. By the time I came down, someone hurriedly came to me and said, "Excuse me, are you a navigator?"
What'd you say?
I asked him, "Why do you ask?" And his reply to me is, "Oh, you speak like a navigator." I said, "How does a navigator speak? How does a navigator sound like?"
Just like you.
He said two things. He said, number one, you have a passion for discipling, that's obvious. The second is, you memorize scripture and you quote scriptures. The navigators I know have been strong in that. So these were the benchmark that was obvious, that they know the scriptures, and that discipleship is their passion. The next thing I look out for is the lordship decision. I've been tutored to make a lordship decision in my mind. I became a Christian in 1968, backslided from Sec 1 to Sec 4, which is 71 to 74. Bad years of backsliding. I came back to the Lord in 75 by His grace. He drew me back like a prodigal son. And 75 onwards, I made Jesus Lord of my life in December 1970. So the lordship decision, the Mount Moriah encounter with God, the sense of absolute surrender marks the disciple of Christ. There's one more mark. There are many marks, but I call it the L as the servant, the learning servant. He's a learner, he's a servant. We have to learn servanthood. We have to learn to serve. We are not just learners in terms of academicians, students in a theological school. We are learners to serve the Lord and His people. So these are marks of disciple I find. The word agenda, the lordship agenda, the love agenda. By this shall all men know you are my disciples if you have love for one another. The servanthood agenda. These are things that mark up the disciple of Jesus.
You mentioned that I imagine there have been many people that have invested in your life in terms of disciple making. You did mention a couple Navigators, Doug Sparks, who was the Asia Pacific director for a while. Jim Chu was our Singaporean, who was our national director here for the Navigators. Now is kind of a missionary at large with us. And I wonder, as you look back at your times with them, are there particular lessons? Do you remember, I learned this from Doug, or I learned this from Jim?
There were huge lessons I learned from this too. They were men of God. It was a joy and a privilege and an honor for me to be mentored by them. And I was hungry. So everything they do, tell me, I do. I'm only doing the best. For example, Doug will tell me, Edmund, I have an assignment for you. I say, anything. He says, you are a fourth-year student in Singapore Bible College. I want you to take one student from each year and disciple them. That was the assignment. I was a busy fourth-year student with assignments. I was a student pastor in the church. And it's like, if you're a student and you're active in ministry in the church, you don't have very much time. So here was my mentor, Doug, who said, I want you to take 4 people, one from each year, and disciple them. I'm the kind, I'm hungry, I'm the kind who you tell me to do something, I will not only do it to the best of my abilities, I will just do the mostest. So instead of taking one from each year, I took 2 from each year. And there were 8 of us. And I'm so glad I did, because one of the 2, whom I would not have selected if I choose one from each year, because he's from first year, I don't know him. At that time, when he was first year, I was in 4th year. His name is Tony Yo. Tony Yo today became the senior pastor of Covenant EFC.
Very strategic choice.
So I'm so glad for Doug's part to say, do it. Here are the things I learned from Doug and Jim. There are many, many lessons I've learned, in huge lessons, deep deposits. I'm indebted to them. But from Jim Chu, one of the deep things I remember was one day, we had lunch together. We spent regular time together. And for his sake, I was looking at my watch. Because he was the national director of Navigators, and we had a long lunch, and I was wondering, when will he need to go back to the office? National directors are busy people. Especially national directors of Navigators. So I said to him, Jim, don't you need to go back to the office? Don't you need to go back to the office? And he looked at me, he gave a big smile, and he said, oh, I've carved out the whole day for you. Literally, my jaw dropped. I went like, wow, this is an immense privilege. Who am I? I was only a Bible college student. I'm not one of his staff. And here's a busy leader who carved out the whole day for me. I've learned that lesson. There was once an American missionary came to see me for lunch. And the same thing happened. After lunch, he asked me, don't you need to go back to the office? And now I got a chance to smile and say, I've carved out the whole day. And he went like, wow. And I told him I learned that from my mentor, Jim Chu. From Doug Sparks, one day Jim came to me and said, Ed, how would you like to be mentored by my boss? I don't know who Doug is. But anybody Jim recommends would be good. I said, I'll count your privilege. Oh, sure, I will introduce you to Doug. He gave me the contact. So I went to Doug's home for dinner with my wife. Priscilla cooked. We had a wonderful dinner, got to know each other. And then, and Priscilla were washing the dishes, and Doug said, come, take a walk with me. I met him for the first time in my life. It was a walk I would never forget. Because the first thing in the walk, I noticed in his neighborhood, he stopped and he talked to his neighbor and he shared the gospel with them. Then I went like, wow, this is mentoring. I learned very quickly. mean, the guy did it with such gentleness and grace and love for the Lord and love for his neighbor. And then he went back to his house, get the thread, pass it to his neighbor, and I was observing all these. Like, I was a Bible college student. I went like, wow, this is better than a PhD program. And then he turned to me and said, okay, Ed, what have you gleaned from your quiet time? I've been asking that question more than 1,000 times now to those I've been mentoring since that day. The year was like 1984, 85. What have you gleaned from your quiet time? Oh, I was so glad I did my quiet time that day. I hate to meet a navigator leader and not do your quiet time. So I was so thankful I did my quiet time. It was Genesis 12, the core paper. I shared with them what I gleaned. And as we walk on, beginning from Genesis 12, all the way to Revelation, he opened up the scriptures and shared with me the covenants of God through the scriptures and the grand faithfulness of God. So it's like, wow, a walking Bible school. I never knew at that time of anyone who is so saturated with the Word of God. So I turned to Doug one day and asked him, Doug, how many verses have you memorized? He struck his shoulders and said, oh, a couple of thousand. I was inspired. So that was Doug. He taught me, one of the things I remembered he taught me is people do not do what you expect, they do what you inspect. And so this idea of accountability in leadership and discipling helped me so much. So these were two wonderful mentors the Lord had brought into my life, and these are some of the precious things that were transcended.